No grave for outlaws. In the sweltering heat of an unyielding desert, a solitary figure emerged from the shimmering horizon. He was a man of the West, dusty and weary, yet his gait remained steadfast. The sun cast sharp, angular shadows, hinting at the contours of his weathered face and the hardened lines of his body. His eyes, a piercing blue, searched the landscape with a quiet intensity that spoke of a lifetime of endurance and solitude. A single-story saloon, a silent sentinel amidst a sea of sand and tumbleweed, beckoned him with the promise of refuge. The man's boots echoed against the wooden planks of the main street as he approached the saloon. The doors, held together by rusty hinges, creaked open with a protest that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of the ghost town. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale tobacco and the lingering whispers of long-forgotten stories. The only other occupants were a few listless patrons, their gazes as vacant as the dust-covered bottles that lined the shelves. The barkeep, a burly man with a handlebar moustache, glanced up from his chore of wiping a never-ending film of grime off the counter. He recognized the newcomer immediately. John Steel-Eye Sterling, a bounty hunter of some repute. Sterling's eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of men who had long ago lost the will to challenge the harshness of the land. They returned to the barkeep, and without a word, the man slid a whiskey bottle and a shot glass across the counter. Sterling's hand, calloused and swift, snatched the bottle and filled the glass to the brim. The clinking of ice was the only sound that pierced the oppressive silence as he downed the amber liquid in one smooth gulp. He didn't bother with the glass. Instead, he placed the bottle back, the gesture a silent request for more. The barkeep obliged, his eyes never leaving Sterling's. There was something about this man that spoke of danger and a story untold. The patrons, sensing a break in the monotony, leaned in, hoping for a glimpse of the excitement they hadn't seen in months. Sterling's gaze remained on the bottle, his mind racing through the events that had led him here. He'd been on the trail of the notorious Rattlesnake Rogers for weeks, and the desert had taken its toll. His horse, a once mighty steed, had succumbed to heat stroke, leaving him to walk the final stretch. The only thing keeping him going was the thought of collecting the bounty. Enough to buy a ticket back east, far from the endless horizon and the whispers of the past that haunted him. The whiskey burned a welcome path down his throat, the liquid fire briefly fending off the desert's chill. He felt the eyes of the townsfolk upon him, weighing his worth, and he knew he had to play the part. He slammed the bottle down, the sound echoing through the saloon. The room held its collective breath, waiting for his next move. Sterling reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, his bounty for Rogers. He slapped it on the counter, the edges fluttering briefly before settling. The barkeep's eyes widened at the sight of the poster.
"You're here for Rattlesnake, huh?"
He rumbled, his voice as coarse as the sand that coated the floor. Sterling nodded, his expression unchanging.
"He's got a habit of leaving his mark, doesn't he?"
The barkeep leaned in closer.
"You ain't the first to come looking for him,
He said, his voice a low murmur.
but you might be the last."
Sterling's eyes narrowed, but he kept his voice steady.
"I've heard that before."
He said, his hand hovering over the bottle.
"Where can I find him?"
The barkeep leaned in further, his mustache twitching with the beginnings of a smile.
Last I heard, he's holed up in the old abandoned mine on the outskirts of town. But you ain't just walking in there, son. That place is a death trap.
Sterling's gaze never wavered, his hand still clutching the whiskey bottle.
I've faced worse.
The barkeep's smile grew into a full-fledged grin.
I'd wager you have steel eye, but Rattlesnake's got a knack for disappearing into the earth like a damn snake. You'll need more than nerve to bring him in.
Sterling returned the grin, a hint of challenge in his eyes.
That's where I come in.
He said, tipping his hat.
I've got a way with serpents.
The patrons, now fully engaged, murmured among themselves. Some nodded in respect, others in doubt. The air in the saloon had shifted, charged with the electric anticipation of a showdown. Sterling knew he had their attention, and he used it to his advantage.
How long has he been in this town?
He asked, his voice cutting through the whispers. The barkeep's smile faded. His eyes grew distant.
Long enough to leave his venom everywhere,
He replied, his tone a mix of anger and resignation. Sterling's hand tightened around the bottle.
What's he been up to here?
The barkeep's gaze darkened.
He's been taking what he wants. Came in one day, flashing a silver tongue and a shiny pistol. Took over the mine and started digging. Claims he's found gold, but I reckon he's just using it as a hideout. He's been terrorizing the folk here, taking supplies, sometimes people.
Sterling's eyes hardened, his mind racing with the implications.
How many people?
The barkeep's voice dropped to a whisper.
Too many. Mostly those who dared to cross him. Others, just for sport. The sheriff, God rest his soul, tried to stand up to him. Now he's feeding the vultures out back.
Sterling's jaw clenched, his eyes cold and determined. He knew this was more than just about the bounty now. It was about justice. He took a deep breath and stood up, the chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to shake the very walls of the saloon. The patrons fell silent, watching him with a mix of fear and awe.
I'll need a horse,
he said, his voice carrying the weight of his decision.
and any supplies you can spare.
The barkeep nodded solemnly.
I'll get you what I can. There's a stable at the end of the street, but pickings are slim these days.
Sterling threw some coins on the counter, the clinking sound loud in the stillness.
I'll make do.
He said, and headed for the door. The patrons parted for him like the sea for Moses, their whispers following him like the desert wind. The stable was indeed sparse, but he found a horse that still had some fight left in it. The animal's eyes held a spark of intelligence, as if it knew the gravity of the journey ahead. Sterling whispered reassurances and promised a better life once they'd seen this through. With supplies from the saloon and a fresh horse, he set off towards the mine. The sun was a merciless sentinel in the sky as Sterling approached the mine. Its blistering gaze bore down upon him, a constant reminder of the harsh world he'd been thrust into. The air grew thick with dust, and the silence was only broken by the distant howl of coyotes. As he neared the mine, he saw the entrance, a gaping maw that seemed to swallow all light and hope. Sterling dismounted his horse, tying it to a withered cactus. He took a moment to survey the area, his eyes squinting against the dust and the glare. The mine was surrounded by a makeshift fence of cacti and sharpened wooden stakes, a macabre warning to any who dared to trespass. The wind whispered through the desolate scene, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter and shouts, the echoes of a town that had once been vibrant and alive. With a heavy heart, Sterling approached the mine. his boots crunching the gravel underfoot. The entrance was guarded by two men, their faces hidden by bandanas, their eyes as cold as the steel of their shotguns. They eyed him warily as he stepped into view.
"What's your business here, mister?"
One of them drawled, the barrel of his weapon never wavering from Sterling's chest. Sterling's hand hovered near his holstered Colt, his eyes locked on the men's faces.
"I've come to see Rattlesnake Rogers,"
he said, his voice even. The guards exchanged a knowing glance before the one who spoke spat a wad of tobacco on the ground.
"You and everyone else.
He sneered.
But he doesn't take too kindly to company."
Sterling's hand didn't move from his side, but his gaze was as sharp as a knife's edge.
"Tell him John Sterling's here to collect what's owed,"
he said, his voice carrying a hint of the steel that had earned him his nickname. The guard smirked, showing a set of rotten teeth.
"He'll be really happy to hear that,"
he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He jerked his head towards the mine.
"But you ain't going in without a proper welcome."
Sterling's hand was a blur as he drew his Colt, the metal glinting in the sun.
"This is my welcome,"
he said, his voice cold and clear. The guard's smirk disappeared, replaced by shock. His companion's finger twitched on the trigger of his shotgun, but Sterling's gun was already cocked and pointed at the man's head.
"Now, you can either tell him I'm here, or I can go in and tell him myself. But I'd prefer not to have to dig you out of the way."
The guard's eyes darted between Sterling's unwavering gaze and the Colt. He swallowed hard, the sound audible in the tense silence.
All right,
He stammered.
I'll go get him."
He turned and disappeared into the mine's shadowy entrance. Sterling waited, his eyes never leaving the remaining guard. The man shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the shotgun held tightly against his chest. The tension grew palpable as the seconds stretched into minutes, the sun beating down relentlessly. Sterling's hand didn't waver, his focus as sharp as the cactus thorns that surrounded them. Finally, the sound of boots scraping against rock echoed from within the mine. Rattlesnake Rogers emerged, his tall, lanky frame silhouetted against the darkness. His eyes narrowed as they adjusted to the blinding sunlight, and a slow smile spread across his face when he recognized Sterling.
Well,
He drawled, his voice a mix of surprise and amusement.
if it isn't the infamous Steel Eye Sterling, I've been expecting you.
He stepped forward, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered pistol.
But I didn't expect you to come alone.
Sterling's gaze didn't flinch.
"I don't need company for this kind of business."
Rogers chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down Sterling's spine.
Confident, ain't ya? Maybe too much so for your own good.
Sterling's grip on his Colt tightened.
"I reckon I've earned the right to be—"
He said, his voice as dry as the desert.
"Now, are you going to come with me peacefully, or do we settle this the hard way?"
Rogers's smile grew wider, his eyes glinting with malice.
Oh, I think you know how we're going to do this, Steel Eye.
He drew his pistol in a smooth motion, the sun glinting off the polished steel. Sterling's hand mirrored Rogers, his Colt appearing as if by magic. The two men faced each other, the air between them charged with the electricity of impending violence. The guard had backed away, his shotgun forgotten as he watched the standoff unfold.
You've got guts, I'll give you that.
Rogers said, his eyes flicking to the bounty poster.
But do you have what it takes to fill that hole in your pocket with my head?
Sterling's eyes remained locked on Rogers.
I've brought in worse than you, Rattlesnake.
He said, his voice steady.
You're just another snake in the desert.
Rogers's smile didn't falter.
We'll see about that,
he said, his drawl thick with confidence. The world seemed to slow as the two men faced off, the sun casting long shadows over the barren land. Sterling felt the weight of the Colt in his hand, a comforting presence that had seen him through countless battles. His heart thundered in his chest, but his hand remained steady. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the culmination of weeks of pursuit and pain. The whispers of the desert wind grew louder, a chorus of ghosts from the past urging him on. Rogers's eyes narrowed, his hand twitching slightly. Sterling knew the outlaw was calculating his chances, the odds of outgrowing the legendary bounty hunter. But Sterling had faced men like him before, men who thought themselves invincible in their own twisted minds. He knew the type, quick on the draw, but slow to understand the cost of their actions. The guard, forgotten in the tension, took a tentative step backward, the grip on his shotgun tightening. He knew that when the bullets started flying, he wanted to be as far from the crossfire as possible. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear, a potent cocktail that only heightened Sterling's senses. His eyes never left Rogers, his mind racing through the possible scenarios that could unfold in the next few seconds. Rogers's hand made its move, a blur of motion that seemed to defy the very fabric of time. But Sterling was ready. His own hand shot up, the Colt barking a greeting that rang through the desert silence. The outlaw's pistol hovered in the air for a fraction of a second, a silent testament to his shock. His hand froze, a look of disbelief etched on his face, before he crumpled to the ground, a crimson bloom spreading across his shirt. The guard's eyes went wide, his shotgun swinging wildly before Sterling's steely gaze brought him back to reality.
You don't want to be part of this?
Sterling said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate with the very earth beneath them. The guard took a shaky step back, his grip on the shotgun loosening. He nodded frantically, dropping the weapon to the ground. Sterling holstered his Colt and approached the fallen Rogers, his boots crunching on the gravel. The outlaw lay on his back, staring up at the unrelenting sun, his breaths shallow and labored. Sterling knelt beside him, his eyes cold and emotionless.
Why?
He demanded, his voice a harsh whisper.
Why did you do this to these people?
Roger's chuckle was wet with blood.
They were in my way.
He coughed out, his smile never faltering.
This town was going nowhere. I brought them excitement, something to remember.
Rogers's blood pooled in the dust, dark and thick beneath the shimmer of the merciless sun. His breaths came in short, ragged bursts, the smile still twitching at the corners of his mouth, even as the light began to fade from his eyes. Sterling knelt beside him, his expression unmoved by the outlaw's dying bravado.
You brought them nothing but fear,
Sterling said, his voice low. Rogers chuckled, though the sound was closer to a gurgle.
Fear makes people feel alive.
Sterling stood, the desert wind tugging at his coat. He turned to the guard, who still stood with his hands raised, staring down at his fallen leader. The shotgun lay in the dust between them.
Pick that up,
Sterling said.
and toss it over the fence.
The man hesitated, then obeyed with jerky movements. The weapon clattered against the wooden stakes and slid into the cactus brush beyond.
You knew what he was doing.
Sterling said, stepping toward him. The guard shook his head.
He said it was just business. Gold in the mine. Protection from bandits. I didn't know about the others, I swear.
Sterling's eyes narrowed.
He killed the sheriff, took people, made a prison for this town.
I didn't.
The man started, then stopped. His shoulders sagged.
I just followed orders.
That excuse doesn't hold up here.
Sterling said.
But you didn't fire. That buys you a second chance.
The man looked up, surprised. Sterling turned back to Rogers, who was now motionless, his eyes glassed over and unseeing. The desert had claimed another soul, but it wasn't vengeance Sterling felt. It was something colder, emptier. He crouched again, reaching into the outlaw's vest and pulling out a brass key, a silver pocket watch, and a small leather pouch that jingled with coins. Roger's pistol lay nearby, untouched. Sterling picked it up, examined it, a beautiful piece, pearl-handled and intricately engraved, and tucked it into his belt.
Get a shovel,
he said to the guard.
He dies out here, but he don't rot on top of the earth like carrion. Not even he deserves that.
The man nodded and disappeared behind the mine entrance. Sterling looked back toward the town, just a smudge on the horizon now. The wind howled low, as if mourning the dead or warning the living. He didn't believe in signs, but the land had its own way of remembering. The return to the saloon was quiet. Sterling rode into town with Roger's corpse slung over the back of the borrowed horse, wrapped in a worn canvas sheet. The townsfolk gathered slowly, the word having spread like wildfire. Some whispered, others stared. The tension that had held them captive for so long now hung limply, like a rope cut mid-hang. Sterling dismounted and dragged the body into the center of the street, where the sheriff's office once stood. He unwrapped it and laid it on the dust. No theatrics, just a corpse and a reckoning. The barkeep was the first to step forward.
Is it done?
He asked. Sterling nodded.
Rattlesnake won't bother you again.
A murmur rose from the small crowd. Faces that had been pale with fear now lit with cautious hope. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts. A few old-timers crossed themselves. Others simply stared. Sterling pulled the bounty poster from his coat and tossed it on top of the body.
Your nightmare's over, but don't forget who let him in.
That quieted the murmurs. A man in the back turned away, ashamed. Another adjusted his hat, avoiding Sterling's gaze. The barkeep stepped forward.
Are you staying for the burial?
Sterling looked toward the empty horizon.
He got a hole outside the mine. That's where he belongs.
He didn't wait for thanks. He turned and walked toward the stable. In the old sheriff's office, its door hanging on a single hinge, Sterling found a stack of unopened letters, dried blood on the floor, and a cracked photograph of a woman in a wedding dress. He sifted through the remnants of a lawman's life and found a badge buried beneath a drawer. He held it for a moment, then left it on the desk. He penned a letter before he left. It was addressed to no one in particular, perhaps just to the land itself.
I brought the snake down, but the venom's in more than just one man. It's in fear, silence, cowardice, the kind that lets monsters grow while good men drink and look the other way. I ain't proud of what I am, but I know what I'm not, and I'm not one of them. I've done what needed to be done. Now I ride east, maybe find peace, maybe just more ghosts. Either way, I keep riding.
He sealed it with a stone on the desk and stepped back into the light. Sterling didn't leave right away. He stayed for one more night, long enough to help bury the sheriff's badge in the cemetery behind the church, where they finally gave the lawman a headstone. Long enough to ride with a few of the town's braver souls out to the mine and burn whatever remained of Roger's operation: supplies, stolen goods, and old chains that had held people captive. The townsfolk offered him gold, what they'd managed to salvage from Rogers's stash, but he refused most of it. Just enough for a new horse and a bottle of whiskey. The rest, he told them, belonged to the people.
You built this place,
He said.
now take it back.
On the morning of his departure, the town stood at the edge of the main street as he mounted his horse. The barkeep handed him a small bag of jerky and dried beans. One of the children handed him a canteen of water.
Thank you, mister.
She said. Sterling tipped his hat.
Don't let another snake take root.
He rode out as the sun crept over the horizon, painting the world in gold and crimson. A month later, Sterling sat on a bench at a train station on the edge of Kansas. He was cleaner now, though the trail had left its mark. A newspaper sat folded beside him, the headline reading, "Outlaw Rogers brought down by lone bounty hunter." He didn't need the fame, didn't want it. But it found him anyway. A woman across the station platform was watching him. She wore a travel coat and held a parasol, her face unreadable beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Sterling ignored her until she approached.
You Sterling?
She asked. He looked up.
Who's asking?
I represent someone with an offer.
She said, pulling out a leather envelope.
You're wanted in Chicago. Someone's looking to clean up the river districts. They want someone who gets results.
Sterling didn't take the envelope.
Tell them I'm not for hire anymore.
She smiled.
They figured you'd say that, but they also figured you'd at least read it.
He took the envelope, opened it slowly, and scanned the letter inside. It spoke of corruption, missing families and city gangs. The same venom, different place. Sterling folded the letter and tucked it into his coat.
No promises.
The woman nodded.
No need. You'll come. You're not done yet.
He boarded the train, finding a seat by the window. As the engine roared and the countryside blurred past, he watched the desert give way to forest, the past to the unknown. He didn't know where the road ended. Maybe it never did. But he knew this much. As long as there were snakes in the grass, someone had to ride with steel in his eyes. And for now, that someone was him.